Kimberly Lucas, educated, inspirational, reading, writing, praying. Her mind shows on her face when she is not happy about being in a place or space. People always tell me all the time to fix my face. So that's where my poem comes from. All right. Lane is our other presenter today.
I am Melissa Lane. I'm your 912 ELA curriculum specialist, and my poem said intelligent, determined, running, reading, relating, and my sentence is her mouth might be smart, but she has a good heart. So any of you that know me know that that's true. That's my statement.
Okay, so we do not have, we only have an hour with you guys today, and we tried our hardest to pack as much into it as possible without overwhelming you. But we're going to get started. So in the chat, I want you to tell us, why are you here today? Really quickly, just type, why are you here? Did someone make you come? Were you interested? Do you want to learn something? What is your reason for being with us today? In the middle of a poetry unit. Yes. Okay. Oh, catchy title. Yay, Miss Rogers.
Thank you. We are very proud of our titles. Thank
Yes, we think long and hard. New ideas, interesting topic and title, growing, new ideas. Okay, good. So hopefully today we will not disappoint you and you'll walk away between today and tomorrow with a fresh perspective on poetry and how you can introduce it to your students. The title actually came from the idea of us um, surveying teachers and what they were interested in. And social justice was a hot topic. So we also know that poetry is something that students tend to struggle with because of the interpretation piece. So what we did was we married those two worlds. So today is going to be about poetry through the lens of social justice. All right. So our objectives for today is going to prepare you for the daunting task of teaching poetry interpretation. And I think that's what makes poetry so hard, is the interpretation piece, because there's so much that has to be tied into it, considering background knowledge, context, and things of that nature. This session in particular will show how the skill of interpreting, and it includes, but it is not limited to, teaching interpretation skills and choosing relevant text. Okay, so today's session, we will introduce you to the framework of how to teach interpretation, and we're going to look at figurative language, which is word choice and usage for students, which are big standards in ELA. And then day 2, we are going to look at teaching students how to read poetry and to determine theme, which in itself can be a task. So you guys, we are going to ask for grace and mercy as we are taking on these huge tasks and trying to fit it in an hour's worth of time, all while making it engaging. So if we talk through some of the pieces, just bear with us. We are going to take you through the framework, but we want to give you some ideas. We won't be able to walk through all of them, but ideas that you can take away. So some things we're going to say, you're a teacher, you know the answer. Let's not spend a lot of time thinking about it, even though you would give your students ample time to think through the process. Because we couldn't fit everything into today, we are going to do an extended session. So if you like what you see here today and tomorrow, we will be doing a session in 2020 and 2022 where we will be face to face, hopefully, fingers crossed. And we will go through a full day of strategies and graphic organizers, analyzing word choice, considering setting an environment, understanding multiple points of view from a text, reading signs and symbols, EOG, EOC, and all that good stuff. So today is just to kind of whet your appetite a little bit in what we have in store.
All right, so we are going to not waste any other time, and we're going to jump right into interpretation and really thinking about what interpretation is and how it looks in our classroom. So we've got a couple of quotes for you, and we want you to just kind of think about these quotes, and we'll ask you to reply out in the chat bar. The first one is, while inference and interpretation are often used interchangeably. There is a difference, and that's one of the big pieces that we want you to walk away understanding, that inference and interpretation are not the same thing. So at this point, how would you explain the difference between inferencing and interpreting, between an inference and interpretation? And if you will, just take a second, drop your response in the chat bar, and we're going to call on two people to unmute and share their thinking. So take about a minute. How would you explain the difference between inferencing and interpretation? Okay, we've got some really good thoughts coming up in the chat. What you think versus how you feel. Chris Lane, I'm looking at yours. Would you mind unmuting and just talking us through yours for just a second?
Yes, ma'am. Before I speak, I just want to let everybody know I'm a math teacher, so have a little bit of grace with me too.
Bless your heart. Go ahead.
Yeah. What I was meaning by what I said was basically when we are making an inference, it's based off of the author's word choice or the way they are writing, and interpretation is our own personal beliefs off of what we read.
Okay. Brittany Stewart, could you expand a little bit on what you're talking about with personally thinking and feeling about the text versus what you see?
Hi, I was thinking interpretation because everybody has different interpretations. So, like, my interpretation would be what I would personally think or feel about something, and somebody else's interpretation might be something totally different.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I see a lot of good thoughts. Would anybody else like to unmute before we move on to some of the answer slides there? Okay. If you would like to unmute, just let us know. We'll be glad to let you speak out. So this is kind of your answer key here. And you guys had a lot of great thoughts in the chat. But while inference and interpretation overlap, we can think of inference as the foundation. So that part's underlined because inference is kind of that lower, that level, that foundational level, and it allows the readers to tap into the well of abstract in order to do the hard work of developing an interpretation. So we start with that inferencing, we create that foundation, but interpretation is where we are able to get into the big ideas, generating the big ideas about our topics. And we also need text-based evidence and a claim to grow these theories. So our inference is one thing, but when we're really talking about interpretation, we're getting into needing that evidence and creating a claim from that evidence about our theories. Interpretation draws on a bundle of moral, social, and emotional concepts. So some of you in the chat bar spoke about how you thought interpretation was more about how you feel about the text, and you are absolutely spot on. This is you bringing in your background knowledge, your moral cues, your emotional concepts. And it's not just a reaction. It is an intersection of the aspects of the text with mediating ideas or lenses. So it's not just your emotion, it's not just what's in the text, it's where those two things intersect. So throughout the rest of today and into tomorrow, we're going to talk a lot about the interpretation framework. And we're going to, really focus on and break this down throughout the rest of the day. But I really want you to see that there are three big parts to interpretation. But these parts do not necessarily go in an order. I want you to notice that the arrows go both ways. So we have generating, coming up with those initial ideas. Then we go into experimenting, testing out the ideas, looking for evidence, but also rethinking. And notice that this framework, you may in the middle of your interpretation come back up to a new generating. You might be rethinking something and end up needing to experiment. So this framework, and you're going to see how we use it, understand that it goes every direction. It's not just a simple 1, 2, or 3. So what we're going to do, I have dropped in the, oh yeah, there we go. Kim dropped it again. I dropped in the chat, there is a training hyperdoc for part 1, and it's going to force you to make a copy. And so what we're going to do right here at the beginning of our training is we're going to watch a short clip. And your purpose for viewing this clip, we want you to try to identify specific elements of interpretation and then be prepared to share with the group. So on your hyperdoc, you should have a section about viewing where you can record your thoughts as you go through. And just thinking about, where do you see these students generating or coming up with their ideas? Where do you see them experimenting or testing these out? And where do you see these students grappling with multiple ideas? So this is just a short video. You can record your answers on your hyperdoc, and then we'll ask a couple of you to share out.
I will not go down underground, because somebody tells me that death is coming round. Does that mean just what it says?
No, it don't mean just what it says. Because you wouldn't go under the ground if someone told you death was coming. But you would go into the ground if you were already dead.
The rest of you agree with that? Well, I kind of agree with it, but I think it just means that he ain't gonna help death out. I mean, it's not like he's just gonna lay down and wait for it. I think he's gonna choose. No, I think he's gonna make the choice to die hard.
Yeah, I think that. Yeah, you could.
That's what it sounds like to me. Okay, but what about the rest of it? When I go to my grave, my head will be high. Head will be high. What does that mean?
Gonna die with pride.
Okay, so I hope you were able to at least get a sense of where some ideas were formed, some claims, and also rethinking. There's some rethinking. I would like for some of you to share out. So let me see, who haven't I talked to? Heather, do you mind sharing out some of your thoughts about this video? Did you see some generating or some rethinking? Could you unmute yourself and share out with us? No? I can call on, you can put some of your thoughts in the chat as well. Carmen, would you mind sharing out some thoughts for us?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can.
Okay. From what I've gained from that video is that the interpretations that those students were making based on the line that she gave them is that they're using their own experiences or things that they have experienced in their environment in order to interpret what that line meant.
So that's where they were coming up with those initial ideas. And as we talked about with the interpretation idea and the framework, you know, using your moral background is definitely where, you know, you get a lot of the interpretation pieces. Anyone else want to share out? Where did you see a rethinking, or where did you see any experimenting in this example, or not? Maybe there wasn't experimenting in this example. What, anybody have thoughts on that?
I think for maybe experimenting, what I see with a lot of my kids, they may know what it means, but they're afraid to say something for fear of being wrong. So they kind of wait till one of their classmates activate their thinking and kind of put it out there and see how the teacher is going to respond to that. And then they'll chime in and kind of add to that based on what they were thinking.
Absolutely. And I think that goes right into the rethinking part of this. So they may listen for that other student to say something. And in this video, they let the one male student speak out first. And even though the young lady wasn't 100% with his answer, she took a minute, and you could tell there was a little bit of nervousness there from the whole class, but she spoke up and said, I agree with parts of it. And so that's where she started rethinking what he said, and then the teacher was able to pull in other pieces of text, and they started experimenting with other ideas there at the end of the clip. So definitely some strength in numbers, but also in knowing that wherever you enter the framework, that's okay. You can enter the framework at the part of rethinking your classmates' ideas. So I've got a thing in the chat. I saw experimenting with the making a choice to make death a difficult example. Okay. So there's definitely some pieces in this, and sometimes it may have been the teacher pushing, but also the students did chime in. So I hope you were able to see how this framework in a very short clip can happen over and over and over in your classrooms every day.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate that this framework is very fluid. So in this particular clip, you saw them generating ideas where the young guy said, well, I think it means this. And then you see them automatically jump to rethinking when the young African-American woman said, well, I think it's dealing more with this. So there's that rethinking piece. And then the experimenting is where they would go find the evidence to support their claims. So this can be out of order when you are teaching poetry, okay? Sorry, guys. All right, for whatever reason, it didn't want to transition. Okay.
So just to kind of close up this first little section, just listening to and debating multiple viewpoints will enhance their interpretation. So just like the students in this video, we just got a very small portion, but as they start playing around with these multiple viewpoints, their own interpretations of the piece will grow. Students will have new opportunities to generate, experiment with, and rethink their ideas about the text as they write, debate, and discuss the text with peers and teachers. And that is sort of the process that we want to take you guys through today.
All right, so we're going to dive into figurative language. So when we're thinking about figurative language and we're teaching students how to interpret figurative language, we're going to do it in 3 steps. One is going to be the pre-assessment. As a teacher, it's going to be important to know how well versed your students are when it comes to interpreting poetry, interpreting figurative language. So that pre-assessment is going to be key. The second phase of that is going to be launching. That is very similar to your activating strategy. What are you going to do to get your students in the mindset of dealing with the type of thinking that they're going to have to engage with to really take on the cognitive load of interpreting poetry? And then the third component is going to be teaching it. And so in that teaching it model, there are things that fall under it. And so I'm going to show you the process. So you will be going in between being teachers and being students in today's session. So pre-assessment explanation. So as a teacher, you select a text. And I know this seems very plain to say, but be sure that you are very intentional about the text that you select. If you're teaching figurative language, you want to find poetry that is rich in figurative language. You want to have the students read the text in the pre-assessment, and then you want them to answer 3 basic questions. I think I gave you 4 on your pre-assessment, but this will show you the level of thinking that you have for your students. Your students have. All right, so if you would look inside of your hyperdoc, you will see in your hyperdoc a section that says, If We Must Die. So we're going to listen to the poem and you can read along. And after we read through the poem, you are going to take my quick pre-assessment where it says click the link to follow along, okay, in the assessment. So for right now, just read the poem and listen as we follow along, and then you're going to take your assessment.
If we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and penned in an inglorious spot.
Oh, now it wants to stop.
Right.
And in an inglorious spot.
It will not do it. Look at the year.
Y'all have no idea how long we tried to get that video to play right.
Right. Okay, so we'll just go to Plan B, and I will read it. So if you'll click on the assessment, it says, if we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and pinned in an inglorious spot, while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs, making their mock at our cursed lot. If we must die, oh, let us nobly die, so that our precious blood may not be shed in vain. Then even the monsters we defy shall be constrained to honor us, though dead. O kinsmen, we must meet the common foe. Though far outnumbered, let us show us brave, and for their 1,000 blows deal one death blow. What though before us lies the open grave? Like men, we'll face the murderous, cowardly pack, pressed against the wall, dying, but fighting back. So I want you to take a minute, and I want you to think about the poem, and I want you to complete your pre-assessment for me. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to do that. Be sure that you hit submit on your responses, and you should get a list of your responses in your email. So take a minute and complete your pre-assessment. All right, it looks like people are finishing up. So let's have a conversation really quickly about our pre-assessment. What do you think the author means when he writes, if we must die, let it not be like hogs pinned in an inglorious spot? I have pulled up a video or image for you to look at. Take a minute, look at it, and then I'm gonna ask one person to share out. What do you think the author is trying to convey? I'm going to call on Miss Nikki Clark.
I knew you were going to call me. I knew it. So I think that the author is trying to make sure that if they must die a death that is one of grandeur, it's not dirty, it's not filthy, but it's a respectful death.
See, and that's why I called on you, Miss Clark. Okay, good. Okay, so in this particular question, as a teacher, you're able to kind of go back and look at some of the things that the entire class said, but this is a great way to kind of get the students involved, okay? All right, so question number 2. Examples of figurative language. Drop them in the chat for me, please. Examples of figurative language. What did you see? What did you see? Examples of figurative language. Murderous, cowardly pack. Mad and angry dogs, metaphor. Only have 2. Open grave, monsters, metaphor. Monsters we defy. Okay, good, great, great. All right, Ms. Hall, I'm going to ask you to unmute and explain to me, what do you think the author was trying to convey when he talked about mad and hungry dogs? We know he wasn't talking literally, so what do you think he was talking about?
Well, you could look at it as a very broad metaphor and society and injustices in general. Also specifically people with certain racist views, people that were holding minorities down, and So I think you could look at it a few different ways.
Okay, thank you for sharing. All right, Ms. Rogers, question number 3. How does the author use figurative language? If we must die, let it not be like hogs hunted and pinned in an inglorious spot, while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs, making their mock at our cursed lot.
We can say figurative language, the use of personifications, giving the animals the thoughts, feelings, and actions of humans.
Okay, good. So pulling in that personification. This question also is a play on question number 2. Students may pick it up that, yes, I'm giving them the answer that there is figurative language in this stanza, but it's also my way as a teacher to analyze what the students know when we're talking about craft and structure, because this here is dealing more with how does he use it. And so question number 4, what do we think the meaning of this poem is? And I'm going to call on Miss Sarah Wall. What do you think? What do you think the author's trying to say?
I think the author is trying to say that when he's comparing, his group to the hogs, hogs are raised to be docile and they're raised for meat. So he's saying you don't need to be like that. You need to fight, even if the other group, like the murderous, cowardly dogs, are fighting you. Even though you're outmatched, you still need to fight until you die.
Beautiful. Thank you. Miss Amy Brinkley, what can you add to that?
I was looking back at my responses. I was like, where did it go? But I see I got an email that told me what my response was.
You know what, while you're thinking, there's a reason why I did that, because sometimes it's hard. Once we type, we forget what we said. So being sure that the students have a copy of their responses, so when you're having these types of discussions, it's easy for them to pull back up.
And to make sure that it was done automatically, I didn't have to click the extra button, say, please send me a copy of my response.
Absolutely.
That was intentional, completely intentional.
So I wrote kind of the same thing, but that, we are humans and deserve dignity. And that if we should not have dignity, if that's not given to us in the moment, then let us not be cowardly in our response to what we face.
Beautiful.
And that's kind of what I thought about it.
Beautiful. Okay, so you guys, as you know, we talked about earlier how we would kind of have to rush through this, but you kind of get to see the process of what this pre-assessment would look like and could look like in your classroom, so that you can see your students thinking. Okay, so as we move into launching, you would have an activating strategy for your students. So I want you to take a minute. I want you to look at can you guys see my screen? Activating strategy?
Yep.
Okay, it's also in your HyperDoc. So if I could get you to look at this and then pick one phrase that you hear all the time, or that you're very familiar with, or that is relevant to your week this week so far, what would it be? Which one stands out, and how have you seen it used? Mute yourself and share out.
It's Miss Biggs.
Okay.
The one that stands out to me that I heard a lot ever since childhood was full as a tick, which we always refer to someone who has eaten too much.
Yes. Usually me at Thanksgiving and Christmas, I starve myself the first 3 days prior to Christmas, so that I can be full as a tick. Okay, Emily Perry says stands out like a sore thumb. Miss Perry, can you unmute yourself and share your thoughts on that piece of figurative language?
Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry if y'all can hear the little cleaner thing in the hallway, but stands out like a sore thumb. My mom always used to say that to me. So when I think about that, I think about an example that happened in class today where, they were doing some independent work. and something was happening and the music was too loud and I was looking around, you know, everybody turn your music down or whatever. And one person looked up at me and his music was too loud. He stood out like a sore thumb. And I was like, friend, I know it's, you know what I'm saying? Like something that sticks out above the rest, something that's very obvious and plain for everyone to see. That's what I think of when I think of stands out like a sore thumb.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Ms. Brinkley said, head is spinning with new information, hashtag 2020. I think we all felt that way in 2020. I know a lot of teachers like, no, I don't want any more PD, none whatsoever. Just leave me alone. And we felt the same way, guys. All right. So as we move on, this is just a quotes activity. You could easily take this, put it on a slide, put your students in breakout rooms and let them have conversations around it. Or it can be an individual task. So very short, getting them thinking about what they already know about figurative language. All right. So we're going to dive into our mini lesson for today. And this is one of the times where, since you are already teachers, you already know what some of these or all of these are. We're going to only give you a few minutes in your breakout sessions to look at one of the videos that is in your group. And let's see, one of the videos that's in your group. And then you're going to answer the questions on all the slides for your group. So we're getting ready to put you in breakout rooms. So if you go to group number 1, if you're in breakout room number 1, you are group number 1. If you're in breakout 2, you are in group number 2. Once you get in your groups, I want you to introduce yourselves to each other, tell which school you are located in, which grade level, and then you can watch one of the videos. It doesn't matter which one. And then I want you to answer the questions on all of the slides. Now, if you were students, I would have you go through, watch all of the videos, and then answer all of the questions. But for the sake of time, once you get into your breakout group, you can watch your simile video and then answer your questions for simile, metaphor, personification. If you happen to be one of the AIG groups and you knock it out before we go back to whole group, there's an extension activity there for your group to follow through. Are there any questions on what I'm asking you to do? If you got it, type got it in the chat for me, so we'll know that we can put you in breakouts. Okay. All righty.
Your message about breakout rooms should be coming in just a second, and that will be which group you are in. Here we go.
Do we have everybody back?
Yes, it looks like it. Yes, we do.
Okay, so I talked to my group, and this is how you would kind of start your lesson. As far as putting the students in breakout rooms, you could do the video, they could take notes individually, and then have a discussion whole group before you teach simile, metaphor. A lot of them are already kind of familiar with it, so it kind of gives them a way to kind of go through the process. We don't have a lot of time, so then what we would do is we would have representatives share out on each slide. Representative 1, what did you learn about simile? 2, what did you learn? That way we're not putting any individual student on blast, but this is what we've kind of done as a group. All right, so this is the meaty part of it. So teaching it. So when we're teaching poetry, there are 3 things that we need to keep in mind. 1, we always have to set the purpose for reading. So the first thing that you would have students do is search for figurative language. Don't try to interpret the poem. Can you find those pieces of figurative language? Then we move into interpreting each piece before we try to put all of the pieces together. So for the sake of time, we're going to read a poem called I Dream of a World. And so while I'm reading, I want you to try to identify what are some figurative language pieces that you hear or see in the poem. I dream a world. I dream a world where I dream a world where no other man will scorn, where love will bless the earth and peace its paths adorn. I dream a world where All will know the sweet freedom's way, where greed no longer saps the soul, nor avarice blights our day. A world I dream where black and white, whatever race you be, will share the bounties of the earth, and every man is free. Where wretchedness will hang its head, and joy like a pearl attends the needs of all mankind. Of such I dream my world. Okay, so when we're looking at that particular poem, what pieces of figurative language is also in your hyperdoc do you see? Did you catch any? And since we don't have a lot of time, I'm going to answer that question for you. So some of the pieces that I found were simile and joy like a pearl, and personification, where we talked about wretchedness hanging its head and it attending to the needs of all mankind, and love, in fact, blessing the earth. Okay, so whenever you're doing interpretation with students, find an entry point. And when we talk about entry points, you have your students identify the pieces of figurative language they found, but you as a teacher are going to decide, where are we going to enter this poem? For me, I'm picking "and joy like a pearl." So entry points are: one, it's going to be the easiest line, and it's not intimidating to students, or two, it's going to be the line that's most crucial for them to understanding the rest of the poem. So as a teacher, find the entry point. So when we're talking about understanding figurative language, there are certain pieces, right? So we have the students to understand what two things are being compared. Those two things are joy and a pearl. So then as a teacher, you know you have to give your students some idea of what to look for. So in doing so, have the students identify what are the characteristics of joy and what are the characteristics of a pearl. And that's the part we sometimes miss when it comes to interpretation. Like we ask them, what is being compared? And then what do you think he means? And we miss the step of defining what are the characteristics. So when we think about a pearl is formed when an irritant works its way to an oyster, a mussel, or a clam. It acts as a defense mechanism to coat the irritant. So in the left-hand side, you see chat buddies. So Anna and Lindsay, you're going to be chat buddies. I want you to chat with each other really quickly. By comparing joy to a pearl, what is the author trying to convey? Find your chat buddy and send them a chat. What do you think the author is trying to convey?
Kimberly, we can only chat with hosts.
Oh, you can't chat? Okay, so let's share out with me then. Okay, that's just a setup problem. Okay, what do you think the author is trying to compare? What is he trying to convey? Anybody want to share out?
That even, to have joy, you're going to go through some possible rough difficulties to be able to claim it, the same way that a pearl has to go through irritants. So do humans as we try to search for joy.
Yes, thank you. Anybody else?
If you're looking at the pearl, is considered a precious stone. So joy would be a precious emotion to inhabit.
Absolutely. Okay, so guys, what you just noticed is we just did generating. So just by having the students take that one line and giving them the characteristics of the things that are being compared, have them make a claim about what that means. Okay, so that's going to be one important part of interpretation. So here's my claim, guys. Joy is a natural defense against the irritant called greed. And I am going to use the evidence for my evidence, line 7, where it says, greed no longer saps the soul. So something that saps is an irritant to me, right? And then line 8, nor avarice, which means extreme greed or wealth for material gain, blights our day. So I'm going to send you to breakout groups, and I want you to have a conversation about testing my claim. Now, this is a chart and organizer that you can use with your students to have them think and rethink. All right, so in your HyperDoc, you will see a chart that looks like this, and it says rethinking claims. I've already filled in what I think my claim is, my viewpoint, and my lines of evidence. I want you to get into your breakout rooms for about 5 minutes, and I want you to talk through all of these questions. And then when you come back, whole group, I want you to tell me if you think my claim is true, is halfway true, or is there something else that can be added to that interpretation? Okay, so we're getting ready to send you to breakout groups. Okay, it looks like everybody else is coming back into the room. Okay, guys. So one thing that I do want to recognize and acknowledge is that we know you did not have enough time to actually dive in and talk, right? So ideally, this session would at least be a half day, but it's an hour. So we had to kind of pick and choose what you can see, which is why we're putting the plug in for you to actually come when we do it face to face. But can I have someone unmute and just tell me, like, what is one thing that your group talked about in the time that you did have?
Carmen, go. You're smart. You know this.
Oh my God.
Called you out. Called you out.
I'm trying to remember. I know we mentioned that the time period couldn't be like something that's current. It had to be something that took place some time ago. And we also mentioned that the author or the poet here had to be naive, because there's no way that that could be possible.
Okay, good. Thank you. Another group.
We said because of the word choice, it might put you during the time period of the civil rights movement. It sounds similar to some of the references that Dr. King made in his I Have a Dream speech.
Good, thank you. One more for the good of the group. Did anybody get to validate the claim or rethink the claim?
I brought up to our group to rethink the claim in the sense that, again, short reading of the poem, it wasn't so much that joy was fending off the greed or defense of greed. It was more like there would be joy in place of greed.
Good. Okay, so do you guys see what we did here? Like, we put a claim on the table, and if you really would have had time to walk through it, like you're going to give your students to walk through that organizer, it is a great way for them to play around with the poetry. And all we have done is one line of the poem, right? So we want to kind of reiterate that if you're going to teach poetry, you want to dig deep first so that it becomes easier for them to understand poetry and the process of interpreting poetry and making claims on what it means. Okay. All right, so then you would end with an assessment prompt for your students. You would find another simple poem that you can show. And this is just a tiered assignment that you could give to your students on an exit ticket, in the chat if you're virtual, and let them pick which one that they would like to respond to. And then based on the number of responses or questions to the responses that you have, it might be good to kind of see where your class's comfort level is in regards to, are they on the lower end of interpretation or on the higher end of interpretation? All right, so Lane?
All right, so we're back again at this interpretation framework, and we hope that even just by looking at that one small line of the poem, that you can see how this framework can really guide your whole lesson. When we worked on that Rethinking Claims document, I hope you see that these can simply just continue, just like you guys brought up, Ms. Brinkley brought up a new idea, and now we can do the same process. We can go back to identifying what her claim is, evaluating her claim, rethinking and experimenting with that claim. So this process is ongoing, and hopefully as your kids get more comfortable with voicing, like you said at the beginning, some are a little uncomfortable with that. As they get more comfortable with voicing their claims, then the rest of the boxes will just fall into place, and it'll just become this cycle that they're in all the time in trying to interpret different pieces of the poems and also the prose that you use in your classroom. So we hope that you saw that. And I know that we were kind of rushed here, but I know some of you, your air and your lights might start getting cut off right here shortly. So at this point, are there questions? Are there big questions that you have right now about the interpretation framework, or really anything that we've gone over today? And if you want to unmute, you can certainly do that. If you would like to stick something in the chat, you can do that as well.
Alrighty.
Okay. And you guys can continue to put some things in the chat. We know some of you have to get off of here, and that is fine. But we are looking forward to tomorrow continuing with this and getting into theme, which is an even denser topic that many of you have expressed concerns and questions on. So thinking about, and you can reflect on this some more because we'll ask you again tomorrow, what are some things that are sticking out to you? So thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate you all.
And tomorrow we're doing it through music. So I want to say that. So that should be fun.
Stay tuned.